Dan, am I audible?
Yes, Nina, you are.
So I think it's time to begin. So a very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. It's indeed a pleasure to welcome you all to our eighth last lecture as part of the international webinar series organized by the Department of English of St. Berkman's College. Well, my name is Nina Abraham, and I'm accompanied by my colleague, Dan George. So over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Nina. Here are just a few guidelines that the participants are humbly requested to keep in mind to ensure the smooth functioning of our program. All the questions that are intended for the Q&A sessions are to be posted in the chat box addressing it to everyone. A feedback form will be posted at the end of this webinar in both Zoom, in the chat boxes of both Zoom and YouTube, and this has to be filled accurately for obtaining the e-certificates. Since all the personal details are to be entered in the feedback form, the participants are humbly requested not to introduce yourselves in the chat box, as this might distract the speaker. These are just a few guidelines to keep in mind. Thank you for patiently listening. Over to you, Nina.
Thank you, Dan. For the welcome address and to introduce the speaker of the day, we next have Assistant Professor Jerin B. Sebastian. So over to you, sir.
Nina, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Distinguished speaker of the day, Dr. Swetha Antony, the Vice Principal of the College, Dr. Benny Matthew, the Head of the Department, Professor P.J. Thomas, esteemed professors, scholars, and all attendees across the world. It is my privilege to welcome you all to the final lecture of the International Webinar Series, organized by the Department of English, St. Berkman's College. Today, Dr. Swetha Antony will speak on the topic Edible Écriture, an exploration of the representation of food in literature and popular culture. Dr. Swetha Antony works as assistant professor in the Department of English, University of Delhi. She secured PhD from the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. Her doctoral research work on the poetry of Kamala Das is broadly oriented towards post-colonial theory and literatures, with special focus on the language question and the theories of cosmopolitanism. Her papers on Kamala Das and post-colonial literatures have been published in various edited volumes and journals. She has forayed into the area of food studies by co-editing with Elizabeth M. Schmidt the volume Beyond the Superficial, Making Sense of Food in a Globalized World, published by Oxford Interdisciplinary Press in 2016. Her ongoing research is on the larger impact of Portuguese colonialism and the origin and evolution of the Latin Catholic community in Kerala, which has led to her engagement with the relationship between art, literature, and environment. On behalf of all the participants, I cordially invite Dr. Swetha Antony to deliver the talk. Over to you, Dr. Swetha.
Ma'am, your mic is mute.
Am I audible now?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Let me just share my screen and this is saying that the host has disabled participant screen sharing.
No, ma'am, it has now been allowed.
Oh, all right, okay. Yeah. Is it visible now?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you, Jerin, for that wonderful introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. It's indeed an honor to be part of one of the intellectually stimulating endeavors of the Department of English, St. Berkman's College. My heartfelt congratulations to the team, especially to the conveners Nitin Varghese and Anish K. Joshi, and of course, the head of the department, Professor P.J. Thomas, for the warmth with which he welcomed me into the program. And I also place on record my gratitude to the principal, Dr. Jacob Matthew, and for this wonderful and fruitful endeavor. When Nitin sir got in touch with me sometime in August, I was not at all hesitant in agreeing to be a part of this webinar series because of the way in which he envisaged the whole series. And when I first saw the brochure, my resolve was all the more solidified because of the title, Stories, Storytelling's Methods, Currents in Vogue in Literature and Culture. And what struck me was the use of the plural markers throughout. And as the last speaker of the series, and after having listened to most of the talks in the series, I can assure that this series have opened up new avenues as far as contemporary English studies itself is concerned. And we in the English literature departments have been warned about the danger of a single story, though we are still not really ready to accept it. Having said that, let me begin my talk by referring to the danger of a single story. So the danger of a single story is a TED talk delivered by Chinmamada Nochi Adichie in July 2009. The contemporary author, having her roots in Nigeria. I'm sure that you must have read her works. So in this TED talk that she delivered in July 2009, titled The Danger of a Single Story, seems to be one of the appropriate points of entry into today's lecture. In less than 20 minutes, Adichie convinces us that our lives, our cultures are composed of many overlapping stories. Apart from highlighting how she found her authentic cultural voice, she warns us about the risks of hearing or listening to a single story, especially about a person or a country, and how all we do is end up critically misunderstanding that person or place if we are just looking at a single story of a person or a place. And my talk today, titled Edible Écriture, an exploration of the representation of food in literature and popular culture, also begins with a story. All right.
Ma'am, can you please tilt your laptop screen a little bit up? We can't see your face.
All right. Can you also tell me how to kind of move to the next slide? Ah, yes. Am I visible now?
Yes, ma'am, you are. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Is the PowerPoint also visible?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
All right. So my talk today also begins with a story. And I would like to call it Oru Dosha Undakiya Kada, a story made by a dosha. And for most of you, most of us Malayalis, when we hear about Oru Dosha Undakiya Kada, or we hear the line Oru Dosha Undakiya Kada, if we are film buffs, this reference will immediately take us to the 2011 Malayalam film Salt and Pepper, directed by Ashik Kapoor, where the entire story is in a way revolving around the Tattal Kutti Dosha, right, that the protagonists encounter, or that leads to their meeting. But this dosha story is not the same, though we will be referring to the film later on. This particular story that I'm talking about takes place in Delhi. The year is 2014, and the protagonist is, of course, me. And the twist being the fact that whenever I introduce myself, so that I moved to Delhi in 2014, and whenever I introduce myself to anyone, and when they know or in a way confirm the fact that I am from South India, back comes a recommendation about a dosa place in Delhi, a place that someone who's new to Delhi and someone who's from South India should definitely visit. And after like the nth such recommendation, I began to think, why God, why? Why me? And why dosha? Why not? Why only dosha? Why not put appam, idiyappam, varakyappam? You know the list. And bang, I decided to engage with this academically, obviously, because there was sort of a crisis that I was facing. And I realized that food is something that is beyond sustenance. Food is something that marks you into a certain category, whether you want it or not. And also, food is not something that has to be taken for granted. And this story was told by me for two reasons precisely. First, to indicate that I'm an amateur in the field and have been exploring this field for not more than 6 years. And secondly, yes, a dosa can signify much more. And yes, it's not just a story, but a dosha can tell you many more stories. And let's now move on to the next dosa tale. And as you can see on the screen, this is a poem titled Galaxy Dosha by Madhu Raghavendra. So I'm sure that you must have already read the poem. This poem is peculiar in many ways, and I'm sure that it will evoke in each one of you certain significations. But I'll just ask you to look at certain aspects of this poem. So right at the outset, the meta-narrative potentials of this poem have to be explored. Not only does the poem evoke the act of making a dosa, but in that process, it is highlighting how our existence is perhaps significantly insignificant. If you look at this whole idea of dosa as a galaxy and how it disappears when you kind of consume it with coconut chutney. So how our existence is perhaps significantly insignificant or ethereal, and how there is always more food for thoughts while having or making a dosa, for instance. Clearly, the poet is highlighting an inevitable link between the acts of eating a dosa and writing about a dosa, which takes us to the next part of my presentation, which is the first part of the title of my lecture, Edible Écriture. I've borrowed this term I've borrowed this term from an essay titled Edible Écriture by Terry Eagleton. And this essay is part of a critical volume titled Consuming Passions, Food in the Age of Anxiety, edited by Sian Griffiths and Jennifer Wallace. And this comes out in the year 1998. And it's highly significant. Why? Because this volume calls into context the changing picture in the academia with respect to food. How to theorize about the significance of food in texts, for instance, and also by using inputs ranging from history, sociology, psychiatry, philosophy, and even science, hardcore sciences, to name a few. This volume is in fact a clarion call to the various disciplines in the universities to take cognizance that the study of food cannot be marginalized or homogenized anymore. And what comes to the forefront, if you look at Terry Eagleton's opening essay, is this inevitable link between eating and writing, and how he engages with this whole idea of consumption. All right, as in we consume literature when we write it, right? And how there is a sort of a processing that is involved from that process of writing to reading or kind of letting that text sink in. So we are consuming literature the way in which we are consuming food, and both these acts are in a way, connected to our mouth. And if you are familiar with the whole structuralist debate and all that, you know that how central the word was. Yeah, the whole idea regarding logocentrism and all. I won't be going into all those details, but you get the general idea how Terry Eagleton is trying to connect the two acts of eating and writing through mouth in a way. Yeah. So if you look at the words here, edible and écriture, what is implied here is consumption, not just of food, but also of écriture, right? And the next part of my recitation will engage with the shifting nuances of the term écriture. And those of you who are familiar with the scene, the intellectual scene or critical theoretical scene, will know how the shifting contours of the idea of écriture itself have in a way influenced English studies, and how it has gone on to redefine the idea of text, all of which are central to the entry of food studies into English studies departments and cultural studies departments. Now, let's engage with the idea of écriture. So écriture, as you all know, is a French word which basically means writing. And when it appears in this form in English text, it refers to one or more specific senses used by modern French theorists. As in, when we use this term, this French term, écriture, within English studies, we don't often mean that very conventional idea of writing. It has at least four associations within English studies. The first one, of course, initiated by Roland Barth through his work Writing Degree Zero, published in 1953, which attacks the illusion of a blank or neutral writing on the grounds that all writing has some style or discourse that shapes our view of the world. Or in other words, how every writing or every text in a way is a site of, or is a cultural artifact, and it involves not just letters or alphabets, but something more, right? And the second aspect is in a way highlighted by Barth again, when he looks at writing as an intransitive activity. And if you're familiar with Roland Barthes's work, you know that there's a sort of an evolution in the way in which he envisages the idea of text, envisages the relationship between the reader, writer, and the text, etc. And this whole idea of writing as an intransitive activity, which contrasts écrivain, writing about something for an ulterior purpose, with écrivain, for whom writing is self-directed about itself as language. So the self-reflexive tendency is in a way highlighted by him. Now, the third aspect is associated with Jacques Derrida and his philosophy of deconstruction, where he looks at writing or écriture as difference, as opposed to the illusory authenticity of speech, or what we call logocentrism, or this idea that you cannot trust writing, you cannot trust écriture because meaning is constantly deferred. So you're familiar with that idea as well. And finally, Helen Cixous's notion that there is this specific language called écriture féminine, which kind of looks at a sort of an emancipatory women's writing, which works against the binary oppositions of patriarchal logic. And since we are on binary opposition also, this volume of which edible écriture was a part was also in a way consciously questioning this idea of, I think, therefore I am, and was in a way stressing on the importance of body, perhaps, and the role played by food therein. So this volume in a way begins from that essential, that very conventional notion of, food as a means of sustenance, right, and foregrounds the importance that it is giving to our body in a way, and then goes on to other disciplines to engage with the meaning of food. So in that sense, if you go back to that volume titled Consuming Passions, Food in the Age of Anxiety, it kind of gives you inputs as to how to approach food studies. And food studies as a whole is inter-trans and multidisciplinary topic in that sense. Now, let me continue this relationship between food studies, or let me try to link that relationship between food studies and English studies, for instance, or cultural studies, for instance. So why, as English literature departments, we are in a way engaging with this question of the significance of food. And for that, we have to, in a way, go back to the beginnings of what we call as cultural criticism. And that is precisely in the year 1964, when Richard Hogarth established the Birmingham School of Cultural Studies alongside Stuart Hall. And Apart from Stuart Hall and Hogarth, we had critics such as Raymond Williams, and this movement was in a way largely influenced by the structural Marxist perspective. And what the center did was to revamp the whole idea of doing English studies or doing a criticism or literary theory by opening up a new field of inquiry, which is roughly historical and philosophical, sociological, and most importantly, literary critical. And also, the primary approach of the center was the reconceptualization of popular culture as a site of resistance and negotiation for marginalized and disempowered groups. And also, the climate in mid 20th century, beginning with 1960s onwards, the whole the various revolutionary movements, student uprising, civil rights movement, feminist movements. So across the world, there were these large scale movements that was kind of questioning the hegemonical discourses, and that has largely led to the revamping of the notion of text or the reinterpretation of text as a site of culture, which is again initiated by Roland Barth, and central to, or as linked to all these larger movements, is the establishment or emergence of food studies as a discipline. And now with the initiation of cultural criticism, what happened within English studies is a sort of an opening up as far as a text is concerned. Text is not just a work of literature, it can be anything. And even food can be a text, right? And one of the problems that we'll encounter when we're looking at literature and food, or literature representation of literature and food, is how do we move beyond the literariness that you associate with food. So one of the earliest interventions into food studies through English studies was to look at food as a symbol or a metaphor. So in the course of this talk, I will try to look at the evolution also that has come into food studies in a way. But let me now take you to the basics of food studies, or how this discipline was established, and a few of the names that are pertinent to the discourse, or that few of the names who were responsible for the initiation of this critical food studies discipline are listed out here. So Roland Barth, of course, towards a psychosociology of contemporary food consumption, in which he tries to link, or he looks at the American society and tries to link, the larger idea of capitalism to the food consumption, and looks or gives a sort of a socio-economic and political reading of the act of consuming food. Then, of course, there is Claude Lévi-Strauss introducing a sort of a structuralist approach to the whole discourse. He engages with this idea of culinary triangle. We'll go into it a bit deeper. So if you look at the years in which these two essays are published, towards the psychosociology of contemporary food consumption is first published in 1961, and Claude Lévi-Strauss is the culinary triangle in 66. So these texts in a way initiates a sort of a engagement with food beyond this whole idea of food as something that we consume for sustaining our lives. So it kind of takes us beyond that. Now we have a few other names here. Pierre Bourdieu, distinction, a social critique of the judgment of taste, J. Brillat-Savarin on gastronomy, Mary Douglas, Deciphering a Meal. So all these critics in a way tries to link this whole act of preparing and consuming food to the class structure or class hierarchy. Right, and what is in a way foregrounded is how there is a certain hierarchy within the society that also gets translated into these acts of not just consuming food, but also of maybe arranging food on a table, what to eat first, what not to eat first, how to drink, and how to kind of compose yourself when you are having a meal. And of course, from the names itself, you'll understand that these are largely a European context, largely French in a way. And as you all know, French cuisine has its own established hegemony in place. I'll go into all these in detail if a need arises, but let me take you to one of the key ideas that is pertinent to our understanding of food studies. And this is opened up by this idea of culinary triangle. Why am I looking at this precisely? Because one of the things that Levi-Strauss does here is to engage with the idea of cooking and brings to the forefront a sort of a binary, a binary involving cultural and natural. And he envisages a sort of a stage in this triangle. So this triangle is envisaged on this whole idea of cooking meat. And he looks at it. So if you're familiar with European cuisine, you'll know that the meat is consumed in different stages, and there is slow cooked and he engages with that sort of a dichotomy. Refined cooking of meat and what he calls is the natural way of cooking. Right, and few of the things that you need to understand here is how he looks at the act of boiling of meat as a cultural form of cooking, and something that is undertaken mostly by women within a domestic space, right? And he engages with this idea of a receptacle and a medium. A receptacle is there as in a vessel that holds water, and the meat is boiled within it. And interestingly, he links that to the realm of the female within the domestic space. And this act of roasting, grilled, smoked food is less refined according to Claude Lévi-Strauss. And the medium that he refers to is fire here. And there is no presence of a receptacle. So there is a sort of a direct contact of the meat with the medium, as in there is no one in a way, disturbing that engagement with, natural, with the natural aspect of meat. So, and interestingly, what he highlights here is that grilled or roasted meat, or the act of grilling or roasting, is often done in outside, that is outside the realm of home, and hence there is no receptacle. There is nothing that connects the food and the medium in a way, and there is a sort of the absence of receptacle is important for him. And because there is no receptacle and there's a sort of a natural way of cooking that is highlighted in these acts of smoking, grilling, and roasting, he connects it to the realm of male, as in the grilled or roasted meat is often given to guests, and mostly male guests. Why? Because it's being cooked outside. So what's interesting about this reading, interesting and also a bit problematic about this reading, is how he links, how he engages with a sort of an established binary, and how that is largely problematic. And but this engagement with the raw and the cooked, in a way, kind of forms the basis of most of the Western discourses on food, critical food studies. Now, and also, if you refer to the earlier critics that I mentioned, they are also in a way engaging with a sort of a hierarchy in place established by the whole idea of capitalism and class structures. So that's a sort of a larger framework to look at the Western discourse. I'm not saying that that's the only framework, but I'm in a way foregrounding that aspect for a particular reason. Now, let me take you to the to an analysis of the representation of food in literature. And I've taken here 5 examples. So one is a story of Madhavi Kutty titled Maypayasam, in which the Maypayasam in a way is a sort of a symbol for mother's love. And the next story that I'm referring to is Jalebi in Hansda Sovendra Shekhar's short story, Desire, Divination, and Death. And there also, in a way, that Jalebi becomes a sort of a representation of motherly love also. But there are certain other factors that come into play. And the next is, again, one of the popular works of Jhunpalari, The Namesake, in which this food item, jalmuri, kind of becomes a sort of a symbol for the protagonist longing for home, or nostalgia, right? So this is a sort of a Bengali cuisine, and she longs for that. And when she moves to Massachusetts, she's not able to have it in the genuine form, so she just makes do with whatever she can find in that studio apartments of it, and that small kitchen, and all she can find is puffed rice, and she makes do with that. All right. And then there is the famous Madeleines in Marcel Proust, In Search of Lost Time. And of course, I'm sure that most of you will be familiar with butterbeer in J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series. So let's now look at each of these food items and what it's signifying. So clearly, Madeleines and butterbeer comes from a Western discourse, and Nepaism, jalebi, and jalmuri from a sort of an Eastern setting. All right, and I hope you're familiar with all these food items. But anyways, I've got a sort of a visual representation of that. So let's begin from butterbeer. So this is a scene from the movie. And here we have butterbeer, and also there are interesting ways in which this imaginary food, in a way, has been brought into reality in many instances. So we have these parks or theme parks of Harry Potter's series. So there you get to taste butterbeer, but it's an imaginary food that is brought to life. All right. Then these are Madeleines, made famous, of course, by Proust, in whom it evokes a sort of a memory of a lost time, right? And of course, there is only a certain way of cooking Madeleines, because it's a sort of food item that is well established within French cuisine. Now, let's look at Nepaism, jalebi, and jalmuri. All right. Can we kind of use Indian cuisine to talk about Nepaism, jalebi, or can we use the term Indian cuisine to talk about Nepaism, jalebi, and jalmuri? It's not it's not that easy in a way, because the way Nepaism is made across Kerala differs, and the preparation of Nepaism itself within a household and as a prasadam, etc., are things that come into play here. And certainly, in a way, it refers to a sort of a setting or factors that are beyond this very simple idea of Nepaism is something that is there to be consumed for sustenance. Nepaism is made on specific occasions, and the ingredients are also to a large extent dependent upon the hierarchy in which you've placed that family, etc. And also, if you're looking at jalebi itself, even when you're calling it an Indian dessert, the way it is prepared itself is kind of drastically different across the subcontinent. And often jalebi is seen as an Indian sweet also, if you're looking at the Western perspective. And of course, this is jalmuri, again largely part of the Bengali cuisine, but found across North India, even in Kerala nowadays. So what I'm trying to suggest here is that unlike the factors that we bring to the understanding of, say, Madeleines or butterbeer, for instance, these dishes, that is jalebi, Nepaism, and jalmuri, cannot be approached with that, singular idea, or with that idea that these are part of Indian cuisine. The way I see it, there are many factors that go into the preparation of each of these items. And the way I see it, there can be as many jalebis as there are, people who are making it. And that's the case with jalmuri or ney payasam. It can be prepared in any number of ways. So what I'm trying to suggest here is that a simple engagement with metaphorics of food or gastronomic practices, the way in which, say, Levi-Strauss envisages it, is not possible in the Indian scene. Or in other words, it's not just class that comes into play when you are looking at food studies in India. There are other factors that have to be taken into account. So a few of the problems there that lies with doing food studies in India is how the Western framework fails to help us understand how to engage with food in the Indian context. Yes, food can be seen as a metaphor, but the understanding of the metaphor itself is kind of put into place by factors such as region, religion, and caste. For instance, the accessible, if you look at Hansada Sovendra's story, the fact that the woman in the story is able to access jalebi is something that is problematized by the caste of that woman. All right. And in a way, ney payasam also indicates a particular, or the ability of the mother to make ney payasam in a way kind of alludes to certain other aspects such as religion, class, and gender. In fact, becomes one of the prominent aspects when you are looking at food studies in India. Right now, I've listed out a few of the inherent issues within food studies in India. Because if you're looking at food studies with respect to literary theory and largely Western literary theoretical practices or pedagogical and methodological practices, those don't in a way work out in our understanding of food in the Indian context. Because if you're looking at the peculiar Indian scene, that engagement with food in a way begins as a form of resistance. Particularly if you look at from 2014 onwards, there is a sort of a vigilance or constant surveillance in terms of who is consuming what sort of food, right? And that has in a way kind of shifted the focus of food studies in India, wherein we cannot just look at food, any food item, as a metaphor or a symbol. It is something that could, in a way, decide whether you're going to live for a long time or not. Because if you choose to eat certain items, your life itself is under threat. So, in that sense, food studies in India is primarily grounded on this idea of resistance. Right, and food is often used not just as a symbol within literature, but it has been used as a sort of a space to engage with issues pertaining to our own existence in terms of religion, ethnicity, gender, and whatnot. And hence, one of the challenges with before us as scholars in the Indian setting would be to define or redefine food studies in the Indian context, and how to come up with an approach that moves beyond the idea of a homogeneous or conventional approach to understanding food. And of course, this question of teaching food studies and the question of multi-trans interdisciplinarity, as in within English studies, when you are teaching, when you are talking about jalebi, for instance, or when you're talking about jalmuri, for instance, how far are you equipped? See, I'm from Kerala. As a Malayali, I'll be able to engage with a food item like varakyappam or banana chips or even ney payasam. But how do we try to translate why jalmuri or jalebi is important in a particular story? without the experience of having it in that particular culture. So there is this whole question of how do we teach it, or how do we bring about a change within a pedagogical practice or methodological practice in trying to translate the representation of a particular food item within the Indian context. So these are some of the questions that I'm kind of placing in front of you, because all of us have to kind of come up with an answer to this. Now, I'll kind of give you an overview of some of the ideas or some of the contemporary scholarship that will help us to understand or tackle these questions. So one of the prominent critics, Priscilla Parkhurst Ferguson, has engaged with this idea of culinary nationalism. The term itself is like, it's pretty self-evident, if you look at it. So she's in a way engaging this idea of how your food in a way defines your socio-political identity. And if you're looking at Arjun Appadurai's key essay, How to Make a National Cuisine Cookbooks in Contemporary India, he's kind of problematizing the whole question of authenticity, or ethnicity in a way, and looking at how it is impossible to define the idea of Indian food. For instance, if you're looking at a food item like samosa, which is often considered as part of an Indian cuisine, it is not essentially rooted in India. It has, its roots go back to Middle East, right? And if you're looking at, say, biryani, for instance, another popular Indian cuisine, part of the Indian cuisine, and yet biryani is not having its roots in India. If you're looking at puttu, idiyappam also, there are, roots that in a way take us to Sri Lanka in a way. So this whole idea of how to then define Indian cuisine. So there are no definite answers as such, but these are some of the critics who have engaged with the problem and have tried to answer it. And one of the key texts here is, of course, K.T. Achaya's series of books. I've just looked at, have given one, Indian Food, A Historical Companion. He also has a publication titled A Dictionary of Indian Food. And Nathan sir was sharing with me a course outline of new approaches to literature, something, the paper for the second year MA program, wherein there is this section on food studies. And one of the texts there is Meera Nair's, Alphabet Soup for Lovers. And if you're familiar with that text, you'll see that she is in a way listing out the food items, alphabetically, like a food dictionary. And one of the things that you could do to understand the problem in kind of pinning down the category of Indian food could be done by comparing K.T. Achaya's Historical Dictionary of Indian Food. As in, you can pick out the food items that Anita Nair refers to in Alphabet Soup for Lovers and compare it with the historical understanding that is brought to that particular food item by K.T. Achaya. So K.T. Achaya, what he does is to look into the epistemology of Indian food, as in he tries to trace the roots of Indian food and the everyday ingredients that we use in food. And one of the things that is so granted if you are engaging with K.T. Achaya's work, or for that matter, the food historian Pushpesh Pant, you will see that what they are trying to foreground is the idea that we don't have the idea of Indian food itself is highly problematic, because what we consider Indian is not essentially intrinsic to the Indian subcontinent. It has with it, or it carries with it, in all probability, a long tradition of the influence of various stages of colonization or interventions onto the Indian continent. So we're not just talking about Western colonization, we're talking about the influence of Arab, Chinese, etc. And also in the context of Kerala, we have to take into account the Portuguese intervention, the Chinese intervention, and the Arabic intervention, and all that. So these are some of the critics who will help you to kind of understand this whole a central question to Indian cuisine or Indian food studies regarding the question of authenticity and this whole idea of heritage cuisine, etc. Another important category in this context is, of course, in the context of the diasporic literature. And one of the key theorists there is Anita Manur, who talks about this whole idea of culinary citizenship. And she also talks about culinary nostalgia to refer to a form of effective citizenship which grants subjects the ability to claim and inhabit certain subject positions via their relationship to food. So if you're looking at Jalmuri for Ashima in that book, the namesake, is something that in a way signifies what Manur calls culinary citizenship. As in, she is in a way establishing her connection to the idea of her citizenship or to the idea of her being an Indian citizen by trying to imitate a possible version of Jalmuri in that small cabinet kitchen in a way. And another important aspect with regard to food studies in the Indian context, and especially within the Indian diasporic context, would be the image of the suitcase. So this is kind of brought to the fore by Jumbaleri's very interesting essay, Indian Takeout, how a family of pirates from Rhode Island brought home all the flavors of Calcutta in a single suitcase. So if you read that essay, it in a way foregrounds, or it in a way kind of brings in this motive of journey that is central to the idea of Indian cuisine, or to the understanding of what we call Indian cuisine. All right. And I'm sure, I don't know whether you've seen this movie, 100-Foot Journey, that, a very interesting movie that looks at a sort of a face-off between Indian cuisine and French cuisine, and the central character, the central protagonist of the narrative, Hassan, in a way kind of crosses over. So that movie in a way also has as a leitmotiv the suitcase that is inherited by Hassan from his mother, and they've traditionally been a part of a family of cooks, and how that suitcase is in a way symbolic of that connection with his roots, and how largely within the diasporic literature that the paradoxical situation of rooting and routing, that is ROTS and ROUT roots, right? So you have to root out, but how do you hold on to the roots? So such ideas such as culinary citizenship, the whole idea of engaging with the idea of suitcase, as in you're carrying your spices with you wherever you go. And also one of the texts that you are dealing with, the Mistress of Spices, that also refers to how the idea of Indian cuisine in a way occupies a third space. So we are not sure whether that spice shop is in fact set in the real world. It occupies a sort of a magical realistic place, a third space sort of, yeah. Now, so this is again, a few of the essays that you can look up to understand how to engage with food studies within the huge repertoire of literature that has food as its center. If you're looking at diasporic literature, food plays an important role. Not just as a mere metaphor or symbol, it is often also used as a means of coming to terms with a sort of a paradoxical situation that each of the protagonists find themselves in, that conflict between the roots and the routes, in a way, right? Yeah. Now, let me take you to some few interesting things as far as the Malayali culinary tradition is concerned. So if you're looking at popular culture, for instance, you'll see that at the turn of the 21st century, with the establishment of what we call as a new generation Malayalam films, we see this tendency of engaging with food very prominently. And I'm referring to two of the most popular films that began the movement. This is Salt and Pepper, and the other one is, of course, Ustad Hotel. And I've chosen these two scenes with a particular agenda in mind, because if you look at Sulaimani, that is that's a sort of a prominent presence in the movie Ustad Hotel, and in Salt and Pepper there is, apart from the Tatil Kutti Dosha, there is Jean's Rainbow Cake, right? uh, and uh, and why am I looking at these two instances? They kind of represent this notion of, how food kind of becomes a symbol for, or kind of becomes a leitmotif in the movie, in both the movies, connecting the various characters, taking forward the relationships that's problematized in the narrative and all that. But that is the given, that's out there for us to understand. But apart from that, what Ustad Hotel in a way talked about was the impact of globalization, for instance. How Ustad's biryani was in a way sold off in that five-star hotel, uh, uh, as a sort of heritage cuisine, and how the price was, I think, 5 times the original price, that is with that as compared to what is sold in Ustad Hotel. And also this whole idea of frames wherein we have uh, spaces, that is culinary spaces, being occupied not by female but also by males. That's the case with Ustad Hotel as well. And if you're looking at Salt and Pepper also, we find a male hero of the movie engaging with this act of cooking. And especially in the case of Ustad Hotel, you'll see that the character played by uh, Dulkar is being rejected on this very solid fact that he is a chef and not not a businessman, or he did not complete his degree in MBA, but he did a course in chef for being you know for being a chef. So that becomes this point wherein he is rejected by a female. So I'm not saying that that's the only saving point of that movie. But what I'm trying to say here is that these movies, in a way, brought to the fore uh, the erstwhile representation of gendered spaces when we are looking at this whole activity of or the various activities connected to culinary culture within Kerala. That's one thing. And the second thing is how both these movies, in a way, foregrounded the shifting, scene when you're when you're talking about eating out, for instance. So and the shift that has come into the idea of eating out itself. So you don't confine yourself inside a hotel building in any sense of the term. You are kind of opening up that space more out into the open. So there is a sort of an evocation of not just of having food in a particular place, but also in a way taking part in activities other than having food. So you can listen to Sufi music, for instance, when you're having food. And if you're looking at Salt and Pepper, uh, the younger versions, or you also have two the characters played by Asif Ali and sorry, I'm not getting the name of the character now, but there is this setting wherein they meet in Cafe Coffee Day. Or they prefer to meet in Cafe Coffee Day, whereas Maya and Kalidasan are bonding over Tatil Kutti Dosha. So what these movies foreground is the shift that has come in to the idea, or to the Malayali imagination as far as eating out is concerned, and how it's not just a generational conflict, but how the scene is kind of changing largely. And and after after these two movies, you will see that there has been a sort of a shift in this whole idea of dining out, and how the spaces have in a way evolved. Yeah, and one more thing is how Ustad Hotel is in a way inspired by this Operation Suleimani, which was put in place by the then collector of Kozhikode, the food on wall projects, wherein you pay for someone else's food, and there's a way in which you could kind of access that food. So the Operation Suleimani that was set in place, it was a sort of a social movement, a movement concerning the availability of food. And so that movie, apart from prominently problematizing the shifting scene within the culinary practices from the perspective of gender, has also in a way opened up various discourses surrounding food studies, in a way, or surrounding the idea of food. Now, I'll very quickly take you to this whole idea of food as a coded language in any culture. So I've just taken, screenshots of a few of the Instagram posts by this page called Pink Lungi Kerala, and how they are in a way playing with this idea of an intersection of food and film. Two favorites of any Malayali. So this is Chaya is a drink, Suleimani is an emotion. So clearly there is reference to the movie Ustad Hotel. And then there is this red velvet cake, of course, made famous by Premam, the movie Premam. So how they are playing with, that idea, how they are trying to connect the audience through the two favorites of the Malayali community, food and films. There is more, and how they are using food. So this is, a few of the popular ways, two of the popular ways in which, through which you eat a payasam. So with papadam and, without papadam. So all that is there. And then of course, memes, so this is again one of the famous movies, Maya Nadi, but how they have in a way kind of created a code here by connecting films to different realms. But there is a sort of a coded language at play here now. So now I'll come to the conclusion. So there are no definite answers as to how to define food studies in India. But what I'm positing here are three ways out, or three possible trajectories that you can follow to really understand food studies in India. The first concept is this idea of edible chronotope, envisaged by Barbara Christenwald in Plato. So she writes in this foreword to Lucy M. Long's work, Culinary Tourism, and she introduces this idea of edible chronotope. So what she is talking about is this idea that it's not possible for us to kind of just look at a food or a food item as something that is sui generis. It is, it comes into being through a complex set of sensory and social experiences. So if you're familiar with the idea of chronotope, it talks about the merging of time and space. So yes, it's a bit complicated, but I'll try to kind of make you understand the whole idea through an example. So edible chronotope, or the idea that we have to, when we are looking at a food item, for instance, we have to kind of take into account, the history that has gone into the creation of that food. And it's not just the time frame that we have to take into account, but the space also, in terms of how it shifts from space to space or location to location as well. And coalescence of space and time is very important as far as food studies in India is concerned. And another trajectory to explore would be the idea of culinary terroir. So terroir is again a term that looks at or focuses on the or foregrounds the idea of a place or a sense of place. And one of the approaches would be to look at how a particular cuisine came into being, or if you're looking at the ingredients that go into the making of particular food item, and whether it is intrinsic to this place or not, and if it's not intrinsic to this place, how did it reach here? So you have to engage with that in a way. So if you're looking at most of the cuisine that or most of the food items that we project as heritage food, kappa and kappe mingari, for instance, kappa is not intrinsic to Kerala in that sense. It was brought to us by the Portuguese in a way, right? So I'm not saying that you shouldn't call it our ethnic food. You should call it our ethnic food. But what you have to take into consideration is the fact that there is a whole range of historical events, or a sort of a complex convergence of time and space that have gone into the creation of this food that we call as ethnic food, kappe mingari. So we have to be conscious about that when we are calling it our heritage. It's indeed a part of our heritage, but it is not indigenous to us. And another framework that we could bring to the understanding of food studies in India would be what Rosie Braghiotti, one of the prominent theorists within post-humanist debate, contemporary theorists, what she talks about is to go back to the indigenous knowledge systems, to go back to the Adivasis, for instance, and look at the food that they're eating, or look at the kind of epistemology on which they base their life and livelihood, and try to imbibe that to understand, how far the question of authenticity or heritage can be understood. So we have to get in touch with what she called as the indigenous knowledge systems, or the indigenous epistemologies, which are largely non-Western. And what she forwards is this idea of non-Western indigenous humanism, wherein you go or try to understand our own situatedness by engaging with the indigenous knowledge bases available to us in a particular region. So because food in India is a heterogeneous category, these are some of the ways in which we can try to understand how it has evolved. So these are a few of the way out, or few of the trajectories that we could use in trying to define food studies in India. Now let me end this presentation by taking you to this very interesting scene from this very popular movie, Premam.
കഴിക്കാൻ പഴംപൊരി ഇട്ടു പഴംപൊരി ഒന്നും കിട്ടൂല കട്ടൻ ചായ കിട്ടൂലേ ഒരു മിനിറ്റ് ഒരു ബ്ലാക്ക് ടീ എന്തെങ്കിലും ഒരു കേക്ക് ഓക്കെ പോരാ വിട്ടാ പോയ കാര്യം എന്തായി പോയ കാര്യം പതുപോലെ തന്നെ ഹലോ
So am I audible?
Ma'am, that scene was audible. However, we could not see anything.
All right. So
the current screen is your presentation.
Yes.
All right.
That screen sharing.
Let me just check.
അളിയാന്നറിയോ പണ്ട് നീ നല്ല പോ
Is it visible now?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
All right.
കഴിക്കാൻ പഴംപൊരി ഇട്ടു പഴംപൊരി ഒന്നും കിട്ടൂല കട്ടൻ ചായ കിട്ടൂലേ ഒരു മിനിറ്റ് ഒരു ബ്ലാക്ക് ടീ എന്തെങ്കിലും ഒരു കേക്ക് ഓക്കെ പോരാ
Am I audible now?
Yes, ma'am. It is perfect.
So I'm sure that you must be familiar with this scene, right? So there is this person who's asking for paramburi and kattan jaya, right? Which are in a way part of our traditional snacks. But that is in a way translated into black tea and any cake, right? So this could be seen as an example of what an edible chronotop can be, as in, this ability of Girirajan Kovi to kind of translate Paramburi and Kattanjaya into any cake and pot black tea, for instance. So things like that, instances like this could be, taken up to engage with the problems that we're dealing with when you're looking at food studies in India. And personally, and also as a scholar, this movie in a way gives us a lot of inputs in understanding, the transformation that has come into the food scene in a way. So if you look at, so it's in a way engaging with, I think, almost 20 to 25 years in the life of George, this protagonist, and the timeline is possibly from 1984 to 2014, I guess. So if you're looking at that phase when he is in his pre-degree days, for instance, they hang out at Gobu's juice shop. And if you look at, there is that scene, I think I can show you that. Is it visible? Is it visible?
Yes.
Yeah.
നീ എവിടെ പോയി കിടക്കരുന്നു അവിടെ പോയി
ലെറ്റർ എഴുതിക്കൊണ്ടിരിക്കരുത്.
മീശ ഓടിച്ചാ നല്ല
ஹலோ ஹலோ
என்ன
மோடி 21 டேஸ்க்கு லாக்டவுன் அனௌன்ஸ் பண்ணிருக்காருமா.
ഇങ്ങോട്ട് കൊള്ളാം നന്നായിട്ട് നീ ഇങ്ങനെ
വെറും സ്റ്റുപ്പിഡ്സ് ആണ് ഇവര്.
എന്താ വിനോദം ഈ കാണിക്കണത്? ഗ്ലാസ് കുടിച്ചാണ്ടല്ല.
എത്ര ഏട്ടാ?
13 രൂപ.
എന്നാ പിടിച്ചോ.
മൂക്കിപ്പോ ഞരമ്പ് വലിച്ചം പൊട്ടിക്കാൻ
നീ വട ജമ്മൻകോഴി.
കാലിഭാഗമായിട്ട് അങ്ങോട്ട് പോണെന്ന് എനിക്കറിയാം.
ബുദ്ധിയുള്ളവർക്ക് ബുക്ക് വേണ്ട പൊട്ട.
അപ്പൊ ബാഗ് മൊത്തം നിന്റെ ബുദ്ധിയാണ്.
നീ ഇപ്പൊ പഠിത്തം നിർത്തി പെയിന്റ് അടിക്ക് പോവാണ്.
So this is the 80s, early 90s setting, the late 80s, early 90s setting. Now let's look at this one. This is again one of the scenes from the movie. Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so if you're looking at these two scenes, you can learn a lot of things. One is the shift that has come in, this whole idea of eating out, or the whole idea of, the idea of love itself. So if you're looking at, the title of, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So if you're looking at the title of the movie itself, Premam, the act of, the various stages in this act of falling in love is beautifully described in the movie, and food becomes one of the key players there. So if you're looking at Gobu's juice shop, for instance, and compare it with Cafe Agap, and interestingly, Agap, the word itself means love. And what you find, the major shift is, how this whole idea of love itself is kind of connected to consumerism, and how there is this, shift towards a sort of a superficial engagement with the idea of love itself. Also, like, this is one of the readings that I'm trying to bring to the floor, but apart from that, what you find is this shift that has come within a span of 20 years as far as our engagement with food is concerned. And, there are various factors that have to be taken into account while engaging with it. So it's not, it's not an easy task in a way, as in there are a lot of problem areas that go into it. But I'm saying that, one of the ways in which you could come to terms with this shift could be by trying to engage with these ideas of edible chronotype, terroir, or also by going back to our indigenous epistemologies when it comes to understanding our food practices. So I'll stop there stop my presentation with that, and I'm sure that I can address some of the issues through the Q&A.
Thank you, ma'am. It's now time for our question and answer session. I and Dan will be simultaneously reading out the questions posted both in the Zoom and YouTube platform.
Ma'am, thank you. There's been several questions. Shall we start with the first question?
Yes, definitely.
The first question is from Manash Prutim Kanikor. He has asked, how does food become a quest for origin, identity, and belongingness in diasporic literature?
The way I understand the presence of food within diasporic literature, it becomes those, very material points through which you could connect to an idea of belonging. So in that sense, it's impossible for us to define the idea of being a diasporic individual. But why is food important here is that it kind of gives a sort of a material connect to it, as in you consume food, you are touching it, there's a sense of materiality that you attach to food. So I believe that sense of concreteness or materiality is what makes food a key player within diasporic literature, but particularly in making sense of your identity and belongingness. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Our next question is from Agnes. Does food studies in literature include the experiences of those for whom food is a luxury? If not, is food studies in literature elitist?
If you are looking at food studies in India, for instance, the discourse itself is grounded in a lot of path-breaking studies done on, Dalit histories or Dalit memoirs or Dalit memories of food. For instance, there is this project undertaken by Sharmila Reke and Deepa Tak. Sharmila Reke is not in, she passed away, but Deepa Tak and Sharmila Reke undertook this study, which they titled "Isn't This Plate Indian?" Looking at Dalit histories and memories of food. So, in the Indian context, it's not elitist. a lot of the discourse that initiated food studies in India comes from this question of non-elitist identities. If you are if you are targeted for because you are meat eaters, and in the Indian context, meat eaters are often part of the Dalit communities. So the discourse.
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yeah. Sorry about that. There was some problem, I guess. Agnes, does that answer your query? In the Indian context, if you look, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Yeah. In the Indian context, food studies is not predicated on a discourse of elitism, but on the contrary, it is predicated on a sort of an active engagement with the resistance that was coming from the minorities and the communities who were in a way stigmatized because of their eating habits. So you must have been like, you guys must be familiar with this whole debate of the problem at Kerala House in Delhi, because it had beef in the menu. So yes, so in India especially, the situation is not, or the food studies is not essentially grounded in an elitist discourse. It's actually counter-elitist, the way I see it.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is from Aratrika Ganguly.
Right.
In the multicultural Indian context, can food help in bridging differences while promoting diversity through culinary literature?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. The fact that, for instance, we're looking at any Indian food, for instance, jalebi, samosa, it's eaten across India, but the process that goes into the preparation or the way we identify with it is different. So somewhere, yes, it does kind of connect to a sort of a pan-Indian identity. But you have to understand that it's not an homogeneous identity in any sense. It is something that kind of brings together the roots and the routes. And if you're looking at Indian food, for instance, does that? Yeah.
Our next question is from Shiji Mariam. Hello, ma'am. My question is, in literature, especially diasporic literature, we mostly observe that food is closely associated with evoking memory, personal and communal. In this context, could food studies be seen as a branch of memory studies?
Of course. Food has been, associated not just with memory studies. If you're looking at partition literature, trauma narratives, border studies, like almost food plays a key role, not just, in those sub branches of diasporic literature in a way.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. The next question is from Nimisha Sinha. I wanted to ask, why does authenticity remain the central question in Indian food studies as per your talk?
Authenticity will always remain a problem within the Indian scene, because I gave you the example of kappa and curry, which is considered as kappa is tapioca, right? And which is considered as a sort of a heritage food of the Malayalis. But if you're looking at the origins of kappa, it's not essentially intrinsic to Kerala. It was brought to Kerala by the Portuguese and brought to India by the Portuguese in a way. So food, it will be largely problematic, because there is this whole range of convergences. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, now you are.
Yeah. So we have to take into account not just the region where that food is served, but also the history of that region. So there are a whole lot of parameters as far as Indian food is concerned, authenticity doesn't exist. It has always been, a space, a third space sort of. It's constantly evolving. So so if you are looking at, say, this whole idea of kebab as an authentic Indian food, it is not an authentic Indian food. It was part of the food and culture that was brought to India by So all these foods that we consider as authentic Indian foods are not essentially intrinsic to the Indian subcontinent in that sense. So what I'm trying to say here is that we have to problematize authenticity, we have to problematize heritage foods, but that's the only way out. We cannot use the term authentic or heritage foods, but yeah, come up with an alternative way of looking at it. And some of the terms that I've foregrounded are just ways of looking at it. So I have not come up with an alternative to authentic or heritage, but I'm saying that you should use it with a certain, you should use it uh, with a certain sensitivity, perhaps, to the history of, the convergences and divergences that has gone into the creation of that particular food item.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is from Maithili Tagare. He's asked, if Indian food studies is not elitist, how can we define or understand non-Dalit, primarily Brahmanical food and food movements?
I said that it is not elitist in comparison with the Western discourse on food studies. So if you look back at the references that I gave you in the beginning, all of them is only problematizing, all those critics were only problematizing the binaries of natural and culture on the one hand, or the question of class hierarchy. They were not bringing into context other factors that are prominent, especially within the Indian context. Indian context based on region, based on religion, based on again your class identity, or based on your gender identity, the food, the processes involved in consumption and preparation of food changes, right? So I'm not saying that I'm not dismissing the Brahmanical discourse on food studies in India, but what I'm trying to say is that the Western discourse on food studies cannot be applied to understand the various nuances of understanding food in India. I'm not negating the presence of Brahmanical tradition. What I'm trying to say is that it's not just it's definitely not elitist the way the Western discourse is elitist. I hope you get my point.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Our next question is from Abita K. Thank you, Dr. Swetha, for your comprehensive talk. By the way, jalebis remind me of Baka's love for jalebis in Untouchable. Dr. Swetha, can you please share your views on food privilege and its intersections with gender? The women as nurturer, for instance.
All right. Within food studies in India, gender is, I think, doubly marginalized, right? So first comes this whole question of caste or class, and then comes gender. And also, there is this whole tendency wherein, women tend to sacrifice a lot of food, even though they are the ones in most domestic households who prepare the food. In the instances that I pointed out, be it Nepalism, or be it the story of Hansa Swetha, you see that it's the women who try to who make or get hold of jalebis, in a way brought to the children by this woman by selling her body in a way, right? And the case of Nepalism also, it's the mother who prepares for it, but the mother dies in the end. So these two are in a way representations of women as marginalized communities in a way. So gender is in a way doubly marginalized within food studies in India.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is anonymous. It's from you too. Are the food studies offered as a part of the syllabus anywhere in India?
Within English studies, I do offer it as an MPhil course. But I have to tell you that as English literature departments, none of them offer it as a full-fledged course. Of course, I think St. Bergman's College do have it, a segment of it in one of their courses for the postgraduates. I do offer it for the MPhil students. Yeah, but other than that, I've not in a way heard of courses in India within English departments. But I could be, wrong also. But as far as I know, nothing much. As in, food has been approached, or food has been studied as part of, within sociology departments. I told you about Deepa Tak and Sharmila Rege's work. They actually undertook that as within the gender studies department there. So this is the University of Pune, right? So so there are other departments who looked at food for their own methodological or for their own critical perspectives. But food studies within English studies, I don't think it's that well established. But I think the scene is changing. Perhaps in a decade or so, it might become a full-fledged department. Let's hope so. Because so much to be done in the scene in India.
Ma'am, our next question is from Shukla Singh. In the film Antony, the characters give it the name of butter chicken at the end while informing a neighbor what is being cooked on the rooftop. Does this suggest that survival of people from Northeast in Delhi is possible if only they subscribe to the North Indian way of things?
I didn't get the name of the movie, sorry.
Antony.
Okay. I haven't watched that movie, so I cannot comment on it. Excuse me. But I stay in an area in Delhi where I encounter a lot of people from the quote-unquote Northeast. And yes, this whole idea of a sort of a prejudice against them is that when they cook their authentic food, it smells. Yes, I consider it as a sort of a stereotyping that is often, one of the ways in which the Northeast is stereotyped in North India. I haven't watched the movie, so I cannot, in a way, comment on that. But I do have experiences wherein the smell of their cuisine is often seen as a means of, stereotyping them or kind of, yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is from Ria Ajit. Ma'am, could you talk about the cultural hegemony with regard to food where international or Western cuisines are hailed over Eastern cuisines? Ma'am, has the scenario changed?
It's too soon to say. See, we have all these, what is it? MasterChef shows, right? Where they talk about fusion and all that. But if you are someone who regularly watches or follows these MasterChef programs, you will see that most often the winners are people who stick to the Western style of cooking. Even if they are Indians or people, the non-Western people who win the title, their cooking would largely be Western. I don't know that from what I've understood of the discourse. So not yet is my answer. The hegemony still exists. Maybe because these counter narratives are not very prominent. India has resources where it could kind of take on food studies, critical food studies, uh, uh, like a storm, but it is not doing anything. So I think that could be because of a lack of a counter narrative to these Western narratives. And I talked about talked about the 100 food journey. So you'll see that Hassan himself is kind of foregoing his own heritage in a way and taking up French cuisine. And one of the tasks that he takes up to get accepted is to cook the egg in the French style, right? So yes, even in discourses such as these, we find that being problematized. As in the Eastern or the non-Western cuisine is not in that sense uh, kind of established as a proper cuisine.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next question is from Fatima Sanjita. How feminism deals food and suggests some theorist who connects food with feminism and cultural theorist who uses food in their cultural studies in literature.
See, I told you about Sharmila Rege and Deepa Tak's work, right? So they engaged with Dalit histories and memories of food, and they were largely looking at Dalit women and their narratives. And there is this work by Sharmila Rege, writing caste, writing gender, narrating Dalit women's testimonies. You will find that she also engages with the female identity, or she approaches the whole thing from that perspective. And if you look at these women's testimonies, you'll find them engaging with the processes of cooking, because that's often some of the things that is associated with the realm of the female. And also this act of fasting, widowhood, etc., are prominent themes that has been problematized by, I think, Sharmila Rege would be your go-to person.
Thank you, ma'am. It's time for our last question. It's from YouTube. It's from Merin Jose. Could you please elaborate the concept of edible chronotop with more examples?
More examples. So whose question is this? Hello, am I audible?
Ma'am, could you please repeat that?
Who asked the question, if I may know?
Ma'am, it's from Merin Jose.
Okay, Merin, I hope you have seen the movie Prema, right? I tried to use that scene in Cafe a Gap, where that person asked for Varikappam and Kattanjaya, right? And that gets translated into black tea and any cake that is available. As far as my engagement with various texts that represent food is concerned, this becomes the most practical way of looking at the idea of edible chronotop. So these are men in 2 generations, right? So that is, I think that's a marriage broker, and the character that is known to us is Giriraj and Koi. So they're obviously from 2 different generations. And this this broker is in a way asking for something that he would have been familiar with if he's going out for tea with someone. So Varikappam and Kattanjaya. So that item, that snack or that food that he's familiar with is in a way translated into black tea and any pastry. All right. So that very act in a way takes us through a whole lot of changes that have come in with time and with space also. So if you are see, if suppose they were meeting in a tattugada, or tattugada where you will get Varikappam and Kattanjaya, there it doesn't, edible chronotop doesn't come into play. But you are sitting inside a new gen cafe, a Gap, all right. And there, the only way to translate Varakappam and Kattanjaya is black tea and pastry, any cake, right? So that scene in a way brings before us a whole lot of discourse that has gone into identifying the shift that has come in with regard to our engagement with our own authentic snacks. I hope that makes sense. I couldn't find any other example to
Thank you.
kind of,
Even there's just one more question, a small question. It's from Sajida KTN. Ma'am, what's your comment on the transition in food culture wherein once women preparing food inside the home is now substituted by the male chefs in star hotels, i.e., that is nostalgia associated with food prepared by mother and the trendy food?
as in, if I understand the question correctly, what is my take on the gender question with regard
On the
to how,
transition, yeah, the transition in food culture.
as in, whose question is this?
It's from Sajida KTN.
I hope Sajita is cooking and within a sort of a professional space, how it's male. Is that what she meant? Because if you're looking at all the famous chefs, most of them are male. Did my voice break?
It's fine now, ma'am.
Yeah. Does she look at that difference in spaces? If that is her
We are
argument.
unable to unmute the participants, but you can answer it.
Yeah, so I'll assume that she is problematizing the domestic space and a professional space. Yeah, I guess that's the answer there. You know, you will always find women as cooks within the domestic space, but never within a professional space, or not prominently within the professional space. And the best example for that, Sajida, right, would be to watch the movie The 100-Foot Journey. So Hassan is this hotshot chef, you know, in a very stylish, trendy French restaurant. But you know, he goes in search for something that reminds him of his mother's cooking in the streets of Paris. And incidentally, his co-worker brings, I think, a kati roll that is made by his wife to as lunch, and they share it. And we find this short French chef, you know, yearning for his mother's cooking in a way. And what such instances, all these instances that I've encountered of engagement with culinary spaces has largely been stereotypical. So within home, within the domestic space, it's always a female who is cooking. But if it's a professional space, it would largely be male. So that stereotype still continues. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, ma'am. It's time to wind up the
Dan,
Q&A.
Dan,
Yes.
could I have a quick question if that's all right?
Yes, sir. Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. So thank you, Dr. Swetha. I'm one of the teachers here at SB as well. It was a wonderful session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. But your name, please.
My name is Vimal.
Hi, Vimal.
Yeah. So it's abundantly clear from your talk that it is kind of pointless to try and strip food from its politics or its context and so on.
Yeah,
discourses around food. But I'm also a little curious about this culture, particularly in some of the more upmarket and niche restaurants in the West, who have this culture of offering a deconstructive food experience.
Yeah.
Right. So you can order a plate of hors d'oeuvres, but they give it to you in a deconstructed form. So would you say that that is an attempt at, in some sense, trying to depoliticize this idea of the context and the politics of food and turn it into some sort of an aesthetic and sensory experience? Or should we be worried about the politics there as well?
See, it could be, you know, a French dish, for instance, could be presented to you in an Indianized manner, but that engagement with the non-Western cuisine is just superficial, right? Maybe in the setting, perhaps in the aesthetics, but I don't know whether they would, in a way, agree to a proper, Indian cuisine within a sort of a hotshot French restaurant. They might, give in to the aesthetic part of it, but I don't know how far they would open up to, a sort of a negotiation with the French cuisine. And if you're looking at Western cuisine in a way, it is in a way a sort of a cuisine that is written down, with a set of rules and all that. So the Michelin stars, for instance, so they have this guidelines, they have cookbooks by Michelin. So a Michelin in a way kind of has a sort of a hegemony there, if I'm not wrong. Have I answered your question, Vimal? But I think, it's largely aesthetic. They do not kind of go deeper. I think they're very apprehensive of kind of moving away from that set rules, as far as my understanding of the debate is concerned. The fusion food that they talk about is also, it might superficially look like fusion food, but in a sense, it would be still that authentic French cuisine or that authentic continental cuisine. But in the case, see, if you have seen Ustad Hotel, for instance, we find the character played by Dulquer bringing in Western cuisine into Indian cuisine, right? Western ways of preparing a food, perhaps. I don't know whether you remember that scene. I forgot. That.
Fine, ma'am. We can hear you now.
Yeah. So the process and the procedures that go into the that go into the Western culinary tradition has been imbibed by the Eastern cuisine, but not otherwise, is what I feel. Hope it answers your question, but from my experience so far, no. Superficially maybe, but not intrinsically.
Thank you, ma'am. We got a lot of questions. We got more than 100 questions, but unfortunately, we do not have time to read all these questions. Thank you, ma'am, for patiently answering all these questions. And to the participants whose questions have been unanswered, we assure you that we will make sure that the speaker sees these questions. Now,
yeah, please mail them to me. I'll try to answer them. Or they can get in touch with me over by email also.
Yes, ma'am. You can leave your email ID in the chat box if you want.
All right. I'll just type it in.
It's time to wind up. However, I would now like to invite the head of the department, Professor PJ Thomas, for the concluding remarks. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, and also thank you, Swetha, for the lecture. I know that you will be very patient to conclude the session and also conclude the series. So in a way, it's very incidental or even proper to end this seminar series with the discussion of food. We talk about food in so many different ways today. Like somebody tweeted recently that Indian food, idli, is boring, and now even food has reached the table of the Nobel Prize.
Yeah, of course.
And you know that food is very, very interesting signifier to talk about.
True.
And in the Bible says, man lives not by bread alone. So obviously food has so many other significations. So I have to be brief. My remarks have to be very short. In fact, these lectures, seminars were a kind of food we were serving to the academia all across India.
Thank you.
And when COVID hit a few months ago, we were all disillusioned about what would happen to our education and etc. And as a department, we were also really confused. Our students who went for holidays, they couldn't return because already there was this lockdown and so on. Now, as I always say, that nothing can stop us from doing what we should. And therefore, in the Bible, it says that we bit the apple And the biting of the apple is again a food, and that food is of course the apple of knowledge, and this biting has to continue. Now, man, we have this inbuilt curiosity and inquisitiveness to acquire and disseminate knowledge. So I think whatever be the pandemic or whatever, we will do this. So anyway, SB College, as you know, and the Department of English at SB has got a historical role in the educational scenario of Kerala and South India and even across India.
I'm honored to be a part of your endeavors.
Yeah,
thank you so much for this opportunity.
Initially, we were also shocked, but we also had to be on our feet and decide what we should do. So we took some very humble effort to.
You have done exceptionally well.
Yeah, so give
given
some
the
leadership to the students and researchers across Kerala and India. And I'm very happy that this was well received, and even now the virtual space is packed, and when around 300 and more people were on the Zoom, and besides there are a lot of other people on YouTube. So which means that nothing can stop us, human and so on. So I salute because this sort of change over to the virtual space, as Akhil Bilgrami famously said, has made us very generous, cognitively generous. Actually, we share our knowledge generously, and as teachers and researchers, we spend more time for knowledge, because more than ever, we spend more time on virtual space discussing and listening to attending lectures and so on. But anyway, it is so out of every evil or out of every problem that there can emerge something good. So anyway, thank you for this overwhelming response that all the participants are giving to the humble efforts that this department is taking. And this is possible only with the help of so many people, and formal welcome will follow. So I have to just stop by saying that I thank all the generous speakers who were part of this webinar series, including Swetha as the last speaker. And also I thank very generously all my faculty members, the members of the department, the students, and the management, and so on. They were all very generous. So thank you and please stay with us. We will come back with more useful and relevant, programs. Thank you so much for your overwhelming reception. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for a wonderful session.
Thank
with
you,
the questions and interactions.
So thank you, sir. Next, I would like to call upon Dr. Benny Matthew for the vote of thanks. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. Resource person of the day, Dr. Swetha. Principal of the college, Dr. Jacob Matthew. Head of the department, Professor P.J. Thomas. Conveners of the program, Professor Anish K. Joseph and Professor Nitin Varghese. Colleagues in the department, scholars, teachers, students, and participants from different parts of the world. Once again, greetings from St. Berkman's College. As we come to the finale of this international series on stories, storytelling methods, currents in vogue in literature and culture, it's a moment of pride and gratitude for St. Berkman's College in general and the Department of English in particular. We are sure that the participants benefited a lot by exposing themselves to the upcoming and new modes of fiction. Now, let's have a hasty look through the whole program. In fact, we started this series on 3rd of September, and now it has extended till now. And we had distinguished speakers from different corners of the world talking on graphic narratives, stories of hope and desire, ethics and historiographic metafiction, epidemics, pandemics, and history. And finally, we have edible Écriture by Dr. Swetha Antony. I don't read out the list of the speakers because all of you were participating very lively, very actively in this whole series, I'm sure. Now, one or two words about today's session. Madam Swetha, your presentation on the relationship between food, literature, and culture has really exposed the audience to a new area of research, which will be surely palatable to the tongue, heart, and brain. Your talk really gave us food for thought. And as our head of the department mentioned, I would like to add a little more to that, as it was the last one in the series. It was like the dessert at the end of a sumptuous meal. So I'm sure that all the participants enjoyed it very well, and we can bid farewell, or we can part with this in a very with the experience of a very tasty meal and some sweet experiences. And now,
thank you so
words
much.
of welcome, as it is a valedictory function. Also, a few words of gratitude to various people who contributed significantly to make it a very, very memorable and a very insightful, enlightening event. One or two words about our principal. Our principal, Dr. Jacob Matthew, is an enthusiastic supporter of all the academic endeavors of the college and especially of the English department. He always finds time to be with us, either physically or virtually. So thank you very much, sir, for your support and for your presence and for your encouragement. Professor P.J. Thomas is the head of the department, and he is the leader of all the academic activities taking place in the department in the recent past. Himself being a passionate scholar of theory and philosophy, he is very keen in bringing reputed scholars from different parts of the world to the campus. And he makes it a point that the scholarship should reach to the students, to the scholars in other parts of the country also. So thank you very much, Professor P.J. Thomas, for this enthusiasm, for this passion for theory, philosophy, and for knowledge. Now, there are many members in our department, in my department, my own colleagues, who deserve to be mentioned, the conveners of the program, Nidin Varghese and Anish K. Joseph, who coordinated or who contacted all the resource persons and made all the arrangements for this mega event. Sirs, your contribution to the college, your contribution to the department, and your contribution to the world of knowledge will be surely acknowledged. So thank you very much once again, Professor Nidin Varghese and Professor Anish K. Joseph, for beautifully organizing this program, which was indeed beneficial for a lot of students and scholars. A few names more to be mentioned from the department itself. Reverend Father Josh, Professor Jerin B. Sebastian, worked silently behind the curtain, coordinating all the activities, contacting the students, and making all the arrangements. Thank you, Father. Thank you, Professor Jerin, for all the contribution you have made towards this great endeavor. Next, I have to thank all the colleagues in the department who were very much involved in the planning and execution of this series. Each one of them contributed in their own way to make this event a grand success. So just for the sake of formality, I thank you, all my dear colleagues, for the active participation and for all the services you have done for the college and for the department. Then there is a long list of students, our own students, who stood with us, who were taking a lot of pain to see it a reality. I don't mention all the names because that will be too lengthy at this time. Our second MA English students, our third BA English students, third year vocational students, second BA English students, and second year vocational students did their role very beautifully by hosting, comparing, and doing or helping in many other ways, especially in the technical matters. So thank you very much, our dear students. I'm sure that you have benefited a lot and you have gained a lot of experience also from this kind of a webinar. Of course, a few students who did their role very efficiently with a great skill as comparers, as masters of ceremony, like Irene, Nikhil, Abhishek, Neena, Dan, Sneha. I'm sorry if I have left out anybody. Please, I acknowledge and place on record the sincere thanks of the department for the services you have done for the college and for the department. And as I told you, you are part of us, and your participation in such programs in future is also very much expected. Then one or two names more. Akhil, one of our former English students, vocational English students, designed the brochure in a very impressive and very beautiful manner. Mr. Tojo helped us in the YouTube streaming. So thanks to Akhil and Mr. Tojo. Now I have to thank, of course, even though it is a cliche, last but not least, I say, all the scholars, teachers, students from various parts of the country and various parts of the world, more than 300 of them. Thanks to all for being with us online for the last 1 month or more than 1 month. I'm sure that you made all these sessions very lively with your questions, with your suggestions, discussions, and everything. So thanks a lot, dear participants, for acknowledging us and for joining us and for being a part of this webinar. And at this moment, I would like to announce, even though I am not entrusted with that duty, I would like to announce that we have yet another mega event in the offing, that is Autumn School, which is already announced. And I'm sure that most of you will be participating in that. You are all welcome to join it also. So have a nice time. Thanks once again to each one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to all the participants. I'd just like to point out that after filling the feedback form, the certificates will be automatically mailed to you within a span of 3 days. And only if the participants do not receive it after the allotted time is there any need to contact the coordinators. Thank you all for joining us for this wonderful session. It was indeed the privilege of the Department of English to have hosted this international webinar series comprising of distinguished speakers from across the globe. Having you with us in this journey was reward enough. Thank you for Benny, sir, for mentioning the Berkman's Autumn School of Critical Theory, which will begin on the 27th of October. Hope to see you all again then. Have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.
Hello, Dan. Just
yes,
take the privilege of saying add one more sentence about Nitin. We have to specially salute and acknowledge the leadership that Nitin has taken in arranging this webinar series. So along with Nitin, the other conveners also have done a great job. So I think it was mentioned in the formal welcome, but still, in the name of all of you, I offer our gratitude to Nitin Verghese for his meticulous leadership. Thank you, Nitin.